Welcome to Easily Entertained. My name is Bryson Olson, and here we talk about all the good things of entertainment. Today we are talking about The Bikeriders, a movie which actually came out back in June, but it is now on Amazon Prime. Not sponsored, by the way, but I've been wanting to watch it for a while and thought, hey, let's review it because it was quite an interesting one. So let's go.
Thinking of starting a riding club.
So The Bikeriders is actually inspired by a book of the same name that was an account of a biker club in the 60s and 70s. The story takes a journey at the establishment of the club, how they represented themselves, and where the main crew ends up and how the club kind of evolves. So we start off with the formation of the club. It's just a bunch of guys who love to talk about motorcycles and occasionally race them. You know, typical activity in the Midwest in the 60s. Probably still happens a bit now as well because, you know, it's just emptiness. So what else can you do but ride motorcycles? Sorry to anybody who lives in the Midwest. But they decide that they want to be even more. They want an actual club that they can all feel a part of. Not just racing motorcycles, but make it more of their personality, you know? One guy even says in the movie all these guys didn't really fit in anywhere, so they fit in together. So they get a bar in the city, I believe it's Chicago is where they are, and they start growing their little group. The main guy, who's kind of like the ringleader of everything, Johnny is his name, he's played by Tom Hardy. He's full of honor, grit, loyalty to his crew, and he kind of keeps everyone from going a little overboard. He's able to control them. It starts off as not your typical unruly motorcycle gang that you would probably think of, like that stereotype. And they even talk about that in the beginning. They're like, it was kind of a stereotype for a while. And as their reputation grows and they run in with other bikers that they don't know, sometimes they fight. Sometimes they're all like, you know what, we're all just bikers, man, it's all okay. But they still got like that tough guy attitude. But things start to get a little bit more hectic as things grow and things happen with certain parts of the crew. Like Benny. He's played by Austin Butler. He has a little altercation more near the beginning of the movie where he's so a part of the club that he wears his jacket and they say it's their colors. It's how they represent themselves. And he's in a bar and they want him to take off the jacket. And he says, no, you'd have to like pry it off me. I'd have to be dead to take off this jacket. So they beat him up because they don't like him. And then things escalate quite a bit. Especially because Johnny cares so much about his crew, especially Benny. So he decides to go down and take care of the guys who did it and then burn the bar down that it happened at. Now, the reputation of this biker club is now obviously getting a little bit more aggressive, and that keeps going. Johnny tries to kind of reel it in a little bit, but it just keeps getting further. It keeps growing. It leaks into other towns and they start other chapters, and so it becomes a little unwieldy. It becomes more like your typical motorcycle gang stereotype. And Johnny doesn't like that. He doesn't like what it's turning into, and neither does Benny. But they both feel loyalty to it, so it doesn't feel like they can leave. And eventually, as it goes on, a kid who was rejected by Johnny to join, he kind of saw him as a poser. The kid joins, and he joins another chapter and then challenges Johnny for leadership and does it in a very dishonest way. He just shoots him instead of the typical fists or knives type gang fight. And then that changes the gang forever as he starts to control it now, and it becomes more like an actual gang. You know, they start getting into murder, drugs, crazy stuff like that. And I know that was suddenly a drastic jump, but it kind of is how it goes in the movie, and you gotta go watch it to fully understand, because it sort of comes out of nowhere in the end. And you're like, whoa, that was crazy. And that's how all the other members think of it. But because this is so much of who they are and what it has become, they can't really leave. So this is kind of just a story about feeling belonging. And this club is where a lot of guys feel that they belong. So they stay. Some of them eventually leave, and they're able to leave before things get a little bit too crazy. But as we reach the end, quite a few of those members have moved on to other things and left the motorcycle gang behind. And it's just kind of an interesting insight into the motorcycle gang stereotype. And I feel like they try to paint a better, or at least more informed picture about them, which I rather enjoy.
You'd have to kill me to get this jacket off.
The line between passion and obsession can be a thin one, and it can only take a subtle push to go from the former to the latter. And like I said in the last section, in this movie, the boys started the club to feel belonging somewhere. All of them were passionate about motorcycles. In fact, they were pretty much borderline obsessed, but they hadn't quite hit that point yet. They were right there, but they hadn't gone over it yet. However, I think this shift starts to happen when it becomes more than what the passion originally was. You know, it goes beyond just motorcycles and it more focuses on the gang aspect of it. And for this topic, I think Benny is a good starting point within this movie. From the beginning, Benny is a huge part of it. He feels belonging, he's passionate about motorcycles, about bikes, about riding, like the open road. It's great. And he has such tremendous loyalty for the club, a lot like Johnny, that he even gets into fights just wanting to defend them. There's a moment where they have like a little standoff with another biker club, and like nothing really happens, but Benny didn't need something to happen. He just went in guns blazing. So he's very, very strongly, he feels very strongly about it. There we go. That, I think, is passion. And some would say that's a bit extreme, like it's more the obsession side. However, I think Benny shows the height of passion right before it dives into the obsession valley. However, things do start to change when the gang gets too big. The other chapters, the new faces that don't know the rules yet or take the rules a little bit too seriously, they will harm members who say they want to leave or do something new. They don't really understand the connections between everybody, so they kind of get into fights. These new members are just the manifestation of the obsession of being in a motorcycle club, blowing things out of proportion in the name of freedom or the club, essentially arguing that such a good thing shouldn't ever be left. And neither Benny or Johnny agree with this. But Benny confronts Johnny about it. He's like, yo, this is turning into something that is not what it's supposed to be. And so when that happens and Johnny doesn't really do anything to change it, Benny decides to leave. And he leaves for so long. He leaves for maybe the last third of the movie, maybe. I'm trying to think if that's accurate. Third's probably correct. But he still wants it to be his passion. He would ride with other groups, but carry his colors. However, when the newcomers arrive, you know, that kid who kills Johnny, Benny ends up hearing about it. And so he returns to Kathy, who was his girlfriend, and, you know, he comes back and he's like, oh, and that's like when he first cries in the movie, because, like, someone who he knew for so long and he was so, like, connected with, that's when it kind of changes for him. So he returns and that passion has become too much. It has developed into obsession, not necessarily for Benny, but for the club overall. And that has changed Benny's perception of it. So it's no longer about loyalty, about freedom, or the motorcycles, or whatever. It is about a message. It's about a status. It's about the gang. It's about the collective or whatever, and like to an extreme point. And that is when something that was once a love or an enjoyment of that thing goes beyond and becomes a problem, showing the power of getting too into a passion. And Benny decides to leave it, and he stops riding and he moves with Kathy to start a new life, much like many of the original members do, like I said at the end of the last section. So I really love how the Bikeriders has been told. You know, it has that passion theme, it has the loyalty theme, like the feeling of belonging. I really like how that plays out. And I love as well that it's essentially inspired by a true story. And most true stories are just reenactments of the events that they are telling. And this, I don't think, is the entire true story, because obviously it's for a movie, so they may have tweaked some things a little bit to make it a little bit more entertaining, but it is inspired by one. And how it does that, and how it brings it about, I think takes a little bit of a different approach, which I rather enjoy. Like I said, a book written about the club by a guy who used to ride with them but went on to college during his time with the gang. As like, I actually don't know if this is a part of the book or if it's like part of the true story, but a guy, he recorded interviews. He was an account of it. In the movie, at least, he is someone who initially rides with them. But anyways, he goes on to college. He records interviews, takes pictures. He does like a little documentary, essentially, is what he's planning. He's doing some kind of journalism with it. And while he isn't the main focus of it, his character is in the movie, of course. And he is actually following the events through interviews, either during the formation of the club, after, years after, and it's just kind of in different stages of when it is. He asks about like recounts, about what happened after he left, different things like that. And it's in this kind of documentary type way almost, which I find incredibly fun. You feel like you're more in the story rather than just watching it when you have these aspects. And when it comes to a story like this, where the personal moments of all these characters is such a big deal, I think this is how you have to tell it. It is more up close and personal. You feel the emotions the characters are feeling, and you understand the power that they wield and that the bikes provide as a symbol of freedom or loyalty or belonging or whatever. And speaking of the bikes, since we're kind of talking about how the film was made in this little section, how they show the bikes, fantastic. It's great. I think it adds so much. Often the start of a scene that specifically focuses heavily on the bikes, whether it's a ride, someone is hopping on one, racing, whatever, the soundtrack, like the music and some of the other sounds in the movie will cut out, or they'll lower a lot so that you can focus specifically on the sound of the motorcycle. And it adds so much. I think it reminds me a lot of Ford versus Ferrari, where the sound is kind of like its own character, and it's so integral to the story that it would feel a little bit weird without the sound. Like, I think it's just incredibly powerful. And it provides that almost spiritual connection with the bikes that the boys feel, and that you as the audience can also feel as like your empathy, you can connect with it. And a movie like this, especially since it's based off real events, it's kind of interesting when it comes to telling a story, because typically the story is kind of interesting, but it's these kind of moments that you want to focus on more. It's more about the connection between the bikes, between the group, and rather instead of the story itself. And I think it's those movie elements that show off the emotions, the passion, the connection, everything about the movie that I think has sold me on it more than anything about it. So now let's talk about our rating of the Bikeriders. And you may be a little bit confused on my rating real quick. But first, let me tell you what our rating scale is from least to best. It is garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day, every day. And I am going to put this at a right mood. And there are reasons. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. In fact, I think it's a great movie. However, the typical kind of storytelling, because like the story's there, but it's not like the main focus, I feel like, and it's a bit more melancholy of a kind of story, maybe. That might be the right word, it might not be. I think that puts it more at a right mood. Like it's something that I would have to be in a right mood for, and it's not just, oh, I could pick this at any time. But it would have to be a specific moment that I would pick it. And I would say quotable, but I'm going to be real. I do not remember most of the quotes from this movie, aside from that beginning one where I was like, the guys didn't fit together. It didn't fit anywhere, so they fit together. But I don't think that one alone puts it in quotable, because I think a quotable usually goes a bit more towards the comedies, because I feel like you can reference them a lot, whereas this one I don't feel like does that. So anyways, I feel like it fits right mood for me. That's just the best descriptor for it. If you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments. But that is it for this week's episode of Easily Entertained. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to be notified of all new episodes every Tuesday. It's always a great time. And if you have suggestions on movies or TV shows you'd like me to talk about in the future, you should comment below. Let me know. I would love some suggestions. But until next time, bye.